Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. After weeks when the only news coming out of Karnataka was about halal hijab and the denial of rights to Muslim traders, we now have a genuine good news story. In fact, you could call it an outstanding story. In an article he recently wrote for Mint, the CEO of the Azim Premji Foundation and the Vice Chancellor of the Azim Premji University says Karnataka has done a better job by far than any state in the country in handling the problem of children's education, which is a direct result of the fact that for 2 years during the pandemic, schools were virtually closed. Joining me now to explain why he's come to this conclusion is Anurag Behar himself. Dr. Behar, in earlier interviews, we've talked at length about the crippling impact of the pandemic on children's education and separately about the steps that must be taken by state governments to ensure this is overcome. Now, in this recent article in Mint, you write about how Karnataka has responded. You say, and I'm quoting you, the state is doing almost everything right and therefore could be a model for other states to follow. So can you start by telling me what are the steps Karnataka has taken that have impressed you so much?
Thank you, Karan. And you're right, as we have discussed, this is clearly the crisis of the century facing our schools, our school children. This whole matter of learning loss driven by the pandemic and the schools having been closed for 2 years. Now, the steps that have to be taken, those are steps that we've discussed in your earlier interviews. Let's categorize what the Karnataka government is doing into 3 things. And the Karnataka government is acting on all 3 dimensions. And that, I think, is important. Any one of those dimensions is insufficient. The first one is that the government has had the, let's say, the courage and the clarity to confront this matter head on. And I'll come to the implications of that. Second, they're doing what is educationally the right thing to do, the appropriate thing to do, the effective thing to do. And the third is that they're doing things which are operationally feasible and will be done operationally well. Now, if any of these dimensions were not acted upon, we would have an insufficient response. So I'll give you some quick implications of these 3 things, right? Because they are willing to confront this head on, there is clarity in the system. For example, teachers have clarity that this entire year is a year for recovering lost learning. There is no ambiguity about that. There are government orders which specifically instruct the teachers to focus only on recovering lost learning. They are not supposed to go back to the current syllabus till the point in time they've recovered lost learning. And I'm using the detail because the detail matters. Another implication of the willingness to confront the issue head on is that the entire system understands that this is the top priority for the system. Whether it is the officer at the block level, district, or here in Bangalore, this is the priority around which the entire system is aligned. Educationally, that's the second dimension. Educationally, and that's much simpler. If you are not to do the educationally right things, there is no way you will recover lost learning, right? So therefore, that's an important thing that they're doing. And third, you could do wonderful thing educationally. You could perhaps be willing to confront the crisis. But if you're trying to design things which are operationally very difficult to execute in the short time frame that we have, it won't work. And I think the remarkable thing is that the Karnataka government has given enough weight to this matter of what is educationally appropriate and can then get executed.
Let me pick up in particular on the second of the 3 things you identified, which you call the right education response. From your article, it's clear that what Karnataka did was to set up a crack team which reviewed the curriculum and redesigned the syllabus for all classes. In essence, the content load was reduced without compromising learning outcomes. And this makes it possible for children who missed out on 2 years to be able to catch up with those 2 years fairly rapidly, effectively, but without missing out on key proportions and key things. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I think that's as any one of us can imagine, that's a very hard task. Very hard task. How is it that you actually reduce content load, reduce what has to be gone through in your in your book or whatever, and still not compromise on the core learning outcomes. So it's from an educational perspective, it's quite a challenge. And I think what the Karnataka government did was exactly the right thing. They pulled a team from across the state that includes teachers, that includes faculty members of what are called District Institute of Education and Training, from the State Institute of Education Research and Training. So they very much pulled the very best people that they had, and they got them to work on this reconfiguration of the syllabus such that in simple terms, it becomes more handleable without compromising on the learning outcomes.
You said another very important thing, the crack team that actually reduced the syllable to make it something that could be handled in a limited period comprises experts. They actually went out and found the experts and gave them the freedom to do it. Both things.
Absolutely. And without that, this won't have been possible. And if I may emphasize one thing, Karan, experts in education are not necessarily the people who are sitting in universities like this. Very often, experts who need to contribute to something of this nature are actually teachers on the ground, block resource people on the ground. And I think one of the important things that has happened over these past few months is that in this entire project, there's an involvement of teachers and of people on the ground. So it's not just some people sitting in some ivory tower who are trying to design this.
Let's then at this point come to the third of the three things you identified, which is that they made it operationally feasible. I take it here the important thing is that first a portfolio of teacher learning materials was developed, which would help support teachers when they do the task of teaching and catching up with what the children have lost. And secondly, a comprehensive teacher handbook was developed to guide the teachers all the time. And I suppose thirdly, one should also include that they set up 2,000 master resource persons who will in turn train 250,000 teachers, so that you'll have an increasing number of teachers who are able to do this teaching of a reduced syllabus in an operationally feasible way right across the state.
Exactly. So as I wrote in that Mint article which you're quoting, let's start with the first thing that you mentioned, that you have over 2.5 lakh teachers here. So how is it that over 2.5 lakh teachers who all their career have been used to teaching and covering syllabus in a certain manner, how is it that now they will start working on recovering lost learning? And for that, this very rigorous, very, very nice handbook has been developed. And the handbook basically tells the teacher, first of all, this year, the priority is recovering lost learning. Second, when you're trying to recover lost learning, this is the kind of assessment tools that you have. Assessment to figure out where do children stand. Has this child lost 2 years of learning? Has this child lost 18 months of learning? So how do you, let's call it diagnose where the children stand? How do you then group them together? Once you group them together, what is the kind of teaching learning material that you should be using? Developing the teaching learning material, as you referred to, is another comprehensive and large task that also was completed. But in the absence of this kind of a detailed step-by-step guidance to the teacher, which then is there in the hands of every teacher, things cannot work. Let me give you another illustration. Let's take this matter of the 2,000 master resource persons that you talked about. Care has been taken that the master resource persons who are teachers themselves, when they are chosen, the better of the teachers are chosen. Because what you don't want is that you train the master resource persons, and then when they in turn start training the rest of the teachers, there's a lot of loss in that transmission. How can you sort of ensure that doesn't happen? You ensure that by making sure that you're selecting perhaps the best possible teachers who then become your master resource persons.
Let me pluck out
the illustrations. These are illustrations, Karan, and there are many such things. But paying attention to this kind of operational detail is really at the crux of the implementation happening well.
Let me pluck out something that I think is key in that answer you gave me. The system in Karnataka actually taught teachers how to teach children who've lost out on years of learning. In other words, the teachers themselves were taught through guidebooks or handbooks how to do it. It wasn't left to them to work out for themselves. And therefore, this is part of a necessary process of thinking and planning, which went all the way down, not just to providing handbooks, not just to providing teacher learning materials, but then ensuring that the teachers were well taught to undertake the task.
Absolutely. And one has to imagine the complexity, because the size we're talking about, 2.5 lakh teachers, and the crunch time that we have, right? So that's exactly what's been done. And that's exactly the reason because of which I said in my article that Karnataka is potentially a model for other states to follow.
In fact, I'm now coming back in reverse order to your point number 1, because now having gone through points 2 and 3, we understand why point 1 is so important. It's because Karnataka publicly accepted not only that there was a problem, but the size and scale of the problem, and then publicly communicated it, that they were able to effectively tackle points 2 and point 3. That public acknowledgement and acceptance was critical.
Absolutely, Karan. And we've discussed this before. It has been puzzling to me that why is it that any state government or any state government official would want to deny the reality of lost learning? It's not the government's fault. It is not the state government's fault that there was a pandemic. The pandemic happened. The shutting down of the schools was the right thing to do. Maybe they could have been opened earlier, but that was the right thing to do. And that's why so much of learning was lost. But it's been puzzling as to why so many states have thought that somehow acknowledging this crisis or confronting this crisis may be construed to be their fault, which it is not. And therefore, to my mind, the Karnataka government deserves all the applause for the clarity and the courage to confront this so clearly. And of course, the rest of the things that we talked about.
You end your Bint article by writing, and again, I'm quoting you, "At this stage, it is hard to imagine anything better." And then you add, "The first signs of implementation are also good." In a nutshell, you are very impressed with what Karnataka has done.
I'm very impressed. I'm very happy. And, it's a great satisfaction that, if I may say so, that my own state is doing this. My own state, because I live here.
Tell me, who gets the credit in Karnataka? Is there a specific minister or an individual, or would it be wrong to try and identify 1 or 2 people?
This is one of those things, Karan, where everybody's got aligned. So from the Minister of School Education to the Principal Secretary, to the Commissioner, to the State Project Director, to the State Council of Education, Research and Training, to the diets, to principals, teachers. Actually, it's worked because of this sharp and alignment. If this alignment were not there, this won't have happened. In fact, it's this alignment that I think we need to get within our states, and then it'll start working.
In other words, everyone deserves the credit. Don't try and identify 1 or 2 people only.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They all deserve all the credit.
Let me ask you a different question. What Karnataka has done reflects very closely what you've been telling me in earlier interviews as steps that need to be taken. Did you or the Azim Premji Foundation work closely with Karnataka? I imagine you did, because what Karnataka has done replicates what you've been saying needs to be done in earlier interviews. But I just thought I'd ask you, did you work closely with them?
Karan, there's 2 things. One is that what I have been saying that should be done is the logical thing that everybody in education has been saying. So I'm not saying anything special at all. It's just that, I get the good fortune of getting interviewed by you. So that's one. 2, of course, we are partners of the Karnataka government, and therefore we've supported and helped. But let's be clear, we work in many states, right? So therefore we will do exactly the same thing on all the states. It's not as though all the states have the same results as Karnataka.
That was my last question. How easy will it be for other states to follow what Karnataka has done? They've set the precedent. They've given the country an example. Presumably following it should be easy, but how easy will it be? Will there be problems to do with politics? Will there be problems to do with acceptance of the size and scale of the problem?
Karan, my estimate is that things are turning. I don't think it'll be a problem, because once that Karnataka and perhaps a few other states have shown the way, I think things are sort of falling in line. So like we've discussed before, I wish this had happened maybe 4, 5, 6 months ago, but it's happening. So I don't think it's going to be so hard. The hard part of it, as we know in our country, is really going to be the execution, not the design and planning. That's pretty much there for everybody to just, you can just look at the Karnataka model and replicate it. But it's the implementation on the ground that actually will matter.
But Karnataka is also showing the other states how to implement and execute, because as you said, the first signs of implementation are good.
Absolutely, absolutely.
In other words, the message to other states is follow what Karnataka has done and help your children recover the years of lost learning.
I couldn't say it better.
Dr. Behar, thank you very much indeed. It really is a pleasure for once to be doing a good news story. And my congratulations to Karnataka for having done it so effectively. Take care.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you so much.